The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Department of State Division of Historical Resources and the state of Florida, and by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund. It's also made possible by Florida's Space Coast Office of Tourism, representing destinations from Titusville to Cocoa Beach to Melbourne Beach, and by the Florida Historical Society Archaeological Institute at the Brevard Museum of History and Natural Science in Cocoa. Welcome to Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben BROTEMARKLE. Established in 1565, St. Augustine is the oldest continuously occupied city in the United States. From the European settlement of the New World to America's manned exploration of space, Florida defines the boundaries of the modern era. In the late 1400s, Spain was unified under Ferdinand and Isabella, who funded the first European exploration and settlement of what they thought of as the New World. In 1513, Ponce de Leon literally put Florida on the map and gave our state its name.
That voyage is documented, fairly well documented, but mostly in accounts that come much later than the voyage itself. And there's still a great deal of controversy and a great deal of debate as to where Ponce de Leon first comes and makes landfall and comes ashore in Florida. We know it's along the Atlantic coast. We know it's more than likely somewhere between the Cape Canaveral, and areas just south of Jacksonville, somewhere in there. Having done that, he explores a little bit to the north, turns around, goes down and rounds the tip of Florida and goes over to what the area that's now Charlotte Harbor and Fort Myers, and explores there. He comes into contact with numerous Native American groups, the Ais on the Atlantic coast, the Calusa on the west coast. And then also kind of goes back out and explores part of the Caribbean and the islands, and then returns to report his findings.
Ponce de Leon returned to Florida in 1521, hoping to establish a colony, but his efforts were rejected by one of the many sophisticated tribes of Native Americans who had been living here for thousands of years. The Calusa Indians of southwest Florida attacked the settlers, and Ponce de Leon died from his injuries. Other Spanish explorers came to Florida in the following decades, seeking land, wealth, and slaves.
There's Narvaez, who comes at least to make an exploration attempt, perhaps with the idea of later settling. Of course, the better known one, of course, is Hernando de Soto, who comes through Florida and 14 other states. And then we have the ill-fated attempt to establish Pensacola. Probably would have been successful, except for the bad timing of arriving just at the same time, almost as a hurricane. And the hurricane sunk most of the ships, destroyed most of their supplies and their food. They did hang on for a year and a half, always starving. I always think it's interesting how people starve for a year and a half. But because everybody's always starving. It's like you can't starve for that long. But that's the report. Possibly because what they were left to eat, they felt as if they were starving. It was not what was familiar. It's not what they had expected. And after the Pensacola debacle, Spain rather lost interest in Florida. It seemed like it was not perhaps the place to try to establish a permanent foothold on the North American mainland. The French try to make their own attempt in 1562. They arrive probably off the coast of Florida, near Jacksonville, go on up to South Carolina, hang around for a while, leave their mark, and then 2 years later come back and establish Fort Caroline in 1564.
With the French establishing a foothold in what the Spanish considered to be their territory, interest in establishing a permanent Spanish settlement in Florida was quickly rekindled. The fact that the French were Protestant Huguenots made the Catholic Spanish even more determined to reclaim Florida. Don Pedro MENDEZ de Avilés eliminated the French colonists and established St. Augustine as the first permanent European settlement in what is now the United States.
I think what's so amazing about St. Augustine is after 450 years of being an active town that people live in, it's still here and it's still tiny. It's survived not as a big metropolis, but as a tiny, tiny little place for 450 years. That's incredible. There's not that many places anywhere in the world, really, that you can say have done that. And if you walk around the town today, you can get a sense, I think, still of what the colonial era was like here, because the scale of the town is still very old. It's got a 19th century skyline. There's no skyscrapers here. I mean, yes, if you go out to the beach, you'll have tall condominium buildings and things, but there, there are no. The tallest building here is the 1920s bank building, basically, and everything else is earlier than that and much lower in height than that. And the streets are the same size. I mean, they're a challenge for modern vehicular traffic because they're so narrow and the sidewalks are high and they're narrow. But that's because, they're really built on the colonial scale. And so that's something that I think is very unique, is that when you walk into this town, I mean, it's still guarded by a 17th century stone fort.
Nobody should leave St. Augustine without visiting Castillo de San Marcos, the Spanish fortress. It's the oldest Spanish fortress in the United States. It was begun in 1672, almost 350 years ago. It's there, you can still find them in other parts of Latin and Spanish America, but it wasn't unique at the time. There were lots of them similar to this. There's a very large one, of course, in Havana, Cuba, that looks like a small version of it. There's one in Matanzas. There's some along the south coast of Cuba and all over Latin America. But this is the one in the U.S., in the North American mainland.
While the colonization of Florida is an important element establishing the beginning of the modern era, most contemporary people would probably feel lost in that world.
If we were suddenly sent back into the 16th century, we would be in a foreign land, a foreign universe, basically. And so foreign that we would not even know how to put our clothes on. I mean, that's how foreign it would be. I mean, how many men today know how to put on a doublet or hose or a rough collar? And how many women would know how to put on all the underskirts that women wore in those days? Or even to put your shoes on, because they wouldn't have been, lace shoes or flip-flops or things like that. Everything about that world would be foreign to us. We wouldn't know how to do anything that comes naturally to us now. So when we talk about what people's attitudes are at that time, we have to remember that they had a totally different mindset. There were a lot more superstitions at that time. The religion, regardless of where you were in Europe, religion and the church and faith played a much bigger role in life, was much more physically present. Among the first things that happened here is the building and the construction of churches, and then later of friaries and conventos and things like that. And of course, there's the whole mindset of how the world works is very different. I mean, there's just not the kind of information that we would have today.
Historians, humanities scholars, and sociologists say that the moment Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, the modern era ended and the postmodern age began.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff, we have a liftoff, 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. 40 feet down, 2.5, picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down, break shadow. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Down a half, contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The limb footbeds are only impressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches. I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Tony, this is so great you can't believe it. I believe it, Charlie. It's raining, Johnny. Look at it go, would you, Charlie? You got all your steering, it's straight. Oh, this is going to be some kind of different ride. Hippity hoppity, hippity hopping over hill and dale. Da 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 da. Hippity hopping along. One ignition. Flat away, Houston. Vector good.
We're burning flat.
That's
Roger,
right.
thrust. Looks good, flight.
How's the base shot flight?
Roger.
Descending. Stand by for splashdown. Recovery, America, stable water, and cruise call.
As the first steps on the moon were taken on July 21, 1969, Neil Armstrong inspired future generations of astronauts.
I remember sitting in front of my television watching those old grainy pictures come about when Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon. I was actually home. I was a freshman in college. I was 18 years old, 17, almost 18 years old. Anyway, I remember when it happened. I was sitting in the living room watching the television pictures along with millions of other people around the world. And I can remember again how exciting that was.
Winston Scott became a NASA astronaut, serving on 2 shuttle missions, making 2 spacewalks, and spending nearly 25 days in space.
When we launched on the space shuttle, you've been lying on your back for a couple of hours now, and it's a little bit uncomfortable. You've got that big bulky suit on, you're in a heads down position. You've been training for a year or more. All you want to do is get the show on the road. You hope nothing happens and you have to abort and come back the next night. But when you're lying there and it finally happens, you can hear the countdown, you can see the countdown on your instrument, and all of a sudden all this smoke and fire begins to billow up around the windshield. The engines are firing and smoke and shaking and vibrating. But nothing's happening yet. This is 7 seconds. And all of a sudden the clock hits 0 and it leaps off the pad. It doesn't rise in slow motion the way it looks on TV. It jumps off the pad, so it kicks you in the back. And it's shaking and vibrating, and you accelerate. It pushes you back into your seat. And the acceleration is tremendous. The entire ride from Earth to orbit is only 8.5 minutes. So it is an incredible ride. There's nothing else in existence that goes like the rocket.
Stars guided the navigators aboard the Spanish ships that came to Florida in the 16th century, many sailing past Cape Canaveral. The astronauts launched into space from Cape Canaveral have a different perspective on the universe.
The stars do look different. They're brighter, they're clearer, and they take on more of a three-dimensional effect. Some look closer than others, which they are, of course, but you can see it more readily than you can on Earth. Also, the constellations look brighter and clearer. Even we're still long distance from them, but looking at the constellations again, the clarity is what's so amazing. And if you never leave Earth, it's impossible to perceive just how clear things are up there because we don't look through any atmosphere. So yeah, the stars, and depending on when you're there, and you can see other planets. Because I can remember looking out, seeing Mercury and seeing Venus. Earth, of course, was right beneath me. So you get that perspective up there. It's so different from viewing them from down here.
The same brave impulse that allowed European explorers to climb aboard ships and sail across the ocean to unknown destinations, including Florida, is alive and well today.
I can imagine what it would be like to be on the first crew going off to Mars. Now that would be cool because you kind of sort of maybe know objectively what's going to happen, but you don't really know because nobody's done it before. I do think it is important that we continue to explore. That's what we were meant to do as human beings. And we ought not to let anything get in our way of pushing the boundaries to continue to explore in every way that we can.
Welcome to the roundtable portion of Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben Brotemarkle, and joining us is Ben DiBiase, Director of Educational Resources for the Florida Historical Society and Archivist at the Library of Florida History in Cocoa. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks for having me.
Jesus Mendez is Associate Professor of History at Barry University in Miami Shores, and Florida history is among his areas of expertise.
Hello, Ben.
Hi, Jesus. N.Y. Nathiri is Director of Multidisciplinary Programs for the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community and founding Director of the Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities. Welcome, N.Y.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Well, Ben, I believe that any discussion of European settlement in Florida should begin with an acknowledgement of the devastating impact that it had on the indigenous population that had been living here for more than 12,000 years. Who was living in Florida when the Spanish first arrived?
Well, when Ponce de Leon and his men first arrived on the shores of Florida in 1513, they would have encountered somewhere between 300 and 350,000 individuals who were occupying the current boundaries of what we know as Florida. When Ponce de Leon first came here, they would have seen thatched roof huts, but also these large-scale communities. And these communities had evolved over the course of millennia. They had developed their own practices of fishing. They were using nets to fish on a large scale along the coastal regions of Florida. In the interior, near present-day Tallahassee, where the Appalachian Indians were located, they were also farming and using early types of agricultural techniques to produce corn and other products. So you had these large communities like the Timucuans in northeast Florida, the Tequesta in southwest Florida, the Calusa, which are down around southwest Florida, in the Tequesta in southeast Florida. But you also had smaller communities that were essentially tributes who would pay to the larger communities. So there were these complex hierarchical structures when they first came here to Florida. And you mentioned they were devastated by the arrival of these Europeans, and that was due primarily to disease, these European infectious diseases that were brought into the Native American communities, but also due to the enslavement of some of these native peoples. They were brought to some of the Caribbean islands and used in some of the agricultural production that was happening down there.
Well, Jesus, we've been discussing how Florida helps define the boundaries of the modern era, which began in the 1400s with the Renaissance and ended in the 1960s. And we looked at the bookends of Florida in the modern era with European settlement at one end of the equation and then America's manned exploration of space in the other. How else does Florida history reflect the modern era spirit of discovery and exploration?
In the intervening 500 years, we should describe as the bookends, many things happened in Florida, and that was its progressive settlement by both the Europeans and by descendants of those Europeans. And traditionally, that is the history of the United States as we know it today. But in study of U.S. history, the version that has predominated has been the east to west expansion. We are enamored with the cowboy figure, the idea of Horace Greeley, go west, young man, the building of the Transcontinental Railroad out west. But you have that, of course, with changing times. And certainly after the invention of air conditioning, the Sun Belt of the United States has become more important, and now attention needs to be paid to the north-south axis of U.S. expansion. And needless to say, Florida plays a very important role in that. You have that Florida, since the last census, has gone from being the fourth most populous state in the Union to being number 3. We have overtaken New York. But it's interesting to note that the 3 largest state population-wise in the United States are indeed Sunbelt states. They are California, Texas, and Florida. So we need to understand that spirit of exploration and discovery, which of course speeds up in the 19th century after the Civil War as Florida becomes open to more and more areas of settlement, that the frontier moves from Central Florida to South Florida. And of course, given the American love affair with the railroad, we have our own railroad magnates, Henry Flagler and, of course, Henry Plant in West Florida. So you have that throughout its history in the 17th, 18th, 19th, and even in the 20th century, Florida has exemplified that American spirit of discovery and exploration.
And that pioneering spirit really is something. You know, we were looking at what it must have taken to sail from Spain or Puerto Rico into the great unknown, not knowing what was ahead of you, or getting on the spaceship and going into space and, and hoping you knew what was going to be ahead, but not really knowing what could happen. But in the middle there is all of that pioneering spirit and the establishment of communities like Eatonville and many other places throughout Florida. And that took a lot of gumption too, to come down to this unconquered territory that had Seminole Indians living here. So that took a lot of spirit as well.
Absolutely. You know, the astronaut Winston Scott talks about the innate part of the human experience, and that is the yin, to discover, to explore. And of course that is true, but a part of that is actually understanding and appreciating that nature, and that comes, I think, through the education of the mind, that lifelong journey of wanting to know more, to look at Florida, for example, and understand that it is a very special ecosystem, that there's the internal discovery and exploration, and there's the external. And I think that the education, the lifelong zest for learning, helps to propel that outer space exploration, because you have a sense of wanting to know more. So I see it as a chicken and egg. You look for, because you learn that it's part of your nature.
You know, and as part of that learning, discovery, exploration, which of course is very forward-looking, you also need to keep in mind what went on before, because of course you need to compare and contrast, and that is where history is very, very important. Florida has often been accused of not having history, and of course we are probably one of the states in the Union with the richest history of all of them. And it's an appreciation of that history that leads us into the direction of discovery and the direction of exploration that we wish to undertake.
And I think this is really an excellent time to acknowledge the role, the fine role that the Florida Historical Society plays in helping the people of Florida to understand the importance, the significance of Florida's history. So many of our residents come in from outside and may not have really had the opportunity to learn about Florida's history. So the Florida Historical Society is certainly doing a very good job in its mission of helping all Floridians, whether we are native to the state or whether we're newcomers, to understand the importance of our heritage and history.
Well, do you think that the pioneering sense of discovery that sent us to the moon and back is still alive today?
Certainly, I think so. I think that you see that in the computer age and the digital technology. That is, to me, one of the best examples of that human condition that wants to explore and invent and discover.
Right, and how we approach these traditional studies like history and anthropology is evolving over time. So with new technology, take for instance the archive, you know, it still plays an important role. We visit archives and we look through original documents, but now those documents are being digitized and are becoming more accessible for folks around the world. So we're just continually moving these sciences and the social sciences further through this pioneering spirit. I think it's the same spirit exists.
Well, thanks to our roundtable panelists, Ben DiBiase from the Florida Historical Society, Jesus Mendez from Barry University, and N.Y. Nathiri from the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community. You've been watching Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben Brotemarkle.